Hi, everyone. So the last time I did a silent disco, I was in college and I ran a partner dance program. Yep, we're doing the testing part where we're making sure you actually have the audio working. Yeah, so last time I did a silent disco, I was running a swing and blues dance group in college, and we took over the library and set up a silent disco where all of the participating dancers had the same audio track streaming, and we just danced silently in the library. And so when they said, oh, we're doing silent disco for the conference, I was like, well, fascinating. I'm curious what that means in this context. So everyone, if you can in fact hear me, please wave. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So thank you so much for joining us right after lunch. I know everyone's a little bit sleepy, but we have another very important conversation on the topic of information sharing in order to combat fraud and scams. And I say another because I have to say, having worked in this space for about a year, this feels like the conversation we just can't get away from. We just keep coming back to over and over and over again. But there's a reason for that. When I was lucky enough to, over the last year, work with Kate Griffin and the team at the Aspen Financial Security Program, convening the National Task Force on Fraud and Scam Prevention to generate the recommendations for a national strategy to prevent scams. And we ran a series of working groups on a variety of different topics, including information sharing. But we found that whether the conversation was supposed to be about law enforcement or consumer awareness or metrics, the conversation still returned back to this topic of how do we pool information across sectors in order to improve the outcomes in our fight against fraud and scams. In part, it's because it is a really important tool in our toolbox. Due to the psychologically manipulative nature of a scam, it tends to happen across a number of different platforms, which means that no single company has all the data about what's happening over the course of the relationship between the scammer and the victim until long after the whole thing is complete. And the scammers do this on purpose because they know that this makes it harder for an individual company to identify criminal activity while it's happening. In other words, the criminals are counting on our information silos in order to get away with these crimes. So that suggests, great, if we can pool the information in one place, then we take away that advantage. I attended a meeting yesterday in which an expert characterized information sharing as the closest thing to a silver bullet that we have in the fight against fraud and scams, and I think many of us would agree with that. But the other reason that information sharing keeps coming up in so many different contexts is that it's a broad term that's being used to describe actually an extremely wide range of different things. So I've been working with my colleague Layla Berra, who is sitting in the audience, over the last 6 months on a deep dive into the information sharing infrastructure that's available here in the US. And we sourced the list of platforms that we were going to survey from our information sharing working group members. And the platforms that they suggested to us to include covered an extremely wide range of actual services and functions. So some of them served as a portal for consumers and victims to report these financial crimes, to indicate that something had happened, to get it kind of into the system to begin with. Some of the platforms provide an opportunity for private sector companies to exchange information, as in they bring a certain type of signal to the table, data to the table, and they get that same type of signal or data back from other contributors. And some of them do this through a database type model. Some of them do it just through an open chat or a live discussion forum. Some actually provide analysis. So they are taking in raw data signals and they are creating a set of trends, report outs, Some are evaluating the quality of the data that is being contributed to them. Some are offering real-time alerts as to problematic patterns that may be showing up on your platform. Some are assembling data from a wide variety of different sources into specially tailored cases for the purpose of law enforcement and prosecution. All of these are covered right now by the term sharing. So this is one part of the reason why the conversation about information sharing is in fact so wide-ranging. Even when it comes to what we are sharing on these platforms, there's a wide range of different types of things. So data, raw data, these are just the yeses or nos, the ones and zeros. These things are happening. Signals being specific indicators that some pieces of these data are likely to indicate that something criminal is going on. And then intelligence, which analyzes all of those different signals to put together a pattern and suggest that there is a path for action. Now, I'm really excited for the platform providers who we're going to invite up in a moment to both correct me in any of those definitions and to expand the list of what are the different kinds of things that we're actually sharing on these platforms. All of these types of sharing are necessary in order to accomplish our goal of getting better and faster at identifying scammers and criminal activity, removing it from our platforms, prosecuting those responsible, recovering funds, and generally disrupting the scam business model, as in making scams harder, riskier, and less lucrative, as Kate said earlier, for criminals. We know that this is not simple to do. We're talking about vast sums of data subject to a wide array of legal and regulatory constraints and jurisdictions, all in a landscape in which the incentives to keep our data to ourselves are still much higher than they are to share it. And yet, it's not impossible to do. In our session today, you'll get to hear from just a few cozy few of the many people who have been taking on the responsibility for making information sharing happen right now in our current legal and regulatory environment, in spite of all of those challenges. Before we bring them out and share them with you, I'm excited to introduce Nick Maxwell, who leads the Financial Intelligence Sharing Program at the Russi Center for Finance and Security, and who will set the stage by sharing some insights from some as yet unpublished recent research on the wide range of information sharing that is already happening around the globe.
Thank you very much, Molly. So Sun Tzu teaches us that if we know ourselves and we know our enemy, we will never be defeated. So taking that spirit, we're going to just situate ourselves and know ourselves in terms of the community of individuals working in platforms to share information, because this can take a wide range of different forms. This is part of our cross-border collaboration to fight fraud, research and innovation project. And I'm Nick Maxwell. I'm the head of the Future of Financial Intelligence Sharing Research Program. So there's three big components to our work. One is a global survey of existing fraud risk information sharing platforms. Two is a deep dive on specific country corridors to really unpack the legal and technical opportunities for enhanced cross-border fraud risk information sharing. And three is to draw that up to intergovernmental policymaking to help support a more effective policy environment for collaboration. But the first part of this is really understanding where are we now with collaboration platforms. We want to help strengthen that research base for dialogue on innovation to better connect communities of leaders and innovators, very much working with the Aspen Institute, and to profile operational collaboration projects. So where are we now? The FIS survey is the largest survey of its kind, so it's an international survey which maps out objectives, membership, the different types of information sharing, the different legal bases used, the different sectors involved, and lots of issues to do with data governance and indeed the privacy enhancing technology applications in play. And sometimes in this space, we can be talking across each other a little bit, perhaps if we're coming from a financial sector community or we're coming from a tech sector community, we're talking about information sharing, but we're actually talking about very different types of activity. So I'm just going to give you some highlights of this. It's really important that we understand where we all sit in the fraud kill chain. So from initiation, which is really where the reconnaissance by those fraud threat actors is taking place. They're doing psychological manipulation, deceptive communications. The execution of the fraud or the scam event, where it's account access or authorization compromise, and of course extraction, the money laundering piece. Our survey is mostly focused in execution and extraction and in financial data and payments data. And there we can have the clearest opportunity to identify a criminal event. Often, as we heard from the Gaza survey, it's the financial institutions that will receive the report first. But that risk information needs to come back to those working in the initiation stages at the cyber domain and the technology and social media space. So the business sectors most relevant to see the activity vary depending on which stage of the fraud kill chain and the attack phases we are looking at, and there's different preventative actions which would be most relevant. And we're going to hear about that from our 8 different case studies of platforms in a moment. In our survey, we cover a wide range of platforms from around the world. All have a kind of unique characteristic and unique learnings to provide for others. And it's all in this spirit of supporting best practice sharing. So that's just how it maps out 35 different platforms around the world. Again, we're not saying this is comprehensive, and we are leveraged into financial and payments data, also including telco data and social media data where it's relevant for financial risk decisions. That's how it looks around the world. It's quite focused on the developed world, but there is a lot of work with the UNODC looking at lesser developed economies. It's really important, as Molly says, to get through this kind of top-tier language of information sharing and really get into what capability are we actually talking about, because it's very different data, it's very different outputs, and it's very different objectives being served. So we use this taxonomy, so there could be collaboration on models of risk, and this could be on a federated basis, so no personal data needs to be shared. We could be talking about messaging, which is either bilateral or multi-party. We could be talking about consortium-level analytics, where the data is ingested at the center, augmented, and fed back out to members in a superior form. We could be talking about more the alert and investigation side of things. This is probably higher threshold cases where there's joint private sector investigative teams working collaboratively on a case, and this could be with a law enforcement start point. We could be talking about a warning function, a one-to-many warning function, where data does not need to be rediscovered, or risk does not need to be rediscovered by each player in the private sector membership. Once the risk is discovered, it's available to all. Particularly in Southeast Asia, there's real advances in real-time tracing, including leveraging the payments market infrastructure to ensure that alerts are traveling as soon as the risk is identified, that confirmed fraud event, and that alert is passing out through the financial system and being able to stop restraint, to encourage restraint, fed also to a law enforcement line that can approve recovery processes. It's brought the time for that recovery process from weeks down to hours. Or we could be talking about joint transaction monitoring. This is probably the most hungry of the data capabilities. It requires a lot of unalerted data to be shared, but it's the most effective in discovering unknown risk. So risk that would be impossible to observe if you were a single entity, a single financial institution, for example. We can map that around the world. So this is from our survey at the moment. It's still ongoing, and we're still ingesting new platforms, so it's not final. But you can see that there's a mosaic of capabilities around the world. No one country or jurisdiction on this list has exactly the same capabilities. And so you can see that countries are innovating in different ways. There's no standard. And this is just talking about capabilities, which is one dimension of variance between the platforms. We could be, of course, talking about sector differences and member differences as well. We could be talking about the data differences. What data are we actually sharing? We divide 4 categories in our report. Category 1, that's strategic information, perhaps aggregated statistics, typologies, model parameters, no personal data. Category 2, we could be talking about cyber or telephony or device operational data, a huge amount of insight available there. often not considered personal data, or PII. Category 3, virtual asset domain data. Again, some of this can be considered non-personal data, non-PII. Some of it is personal data and PII. And category 4, operational, traditional finance data. So this is your quite sensitive customer data, account data, and also transaction data. So we can map that out around how all these different platforms use the data and their membership. Some of the platforms, about a third of them, really do have a good stretch across different sectors and different data categories. About a third of them are focused on financial data, and about a third of them are focused on strategic and sometimes telephony and device data. So there is a big diversity around the world, and we're going to get into detail now in this session. Obviously, the future is how can we improve that cross-sector sharing and, of course, cross-border sharing. When we surveyed all of those platforms, the key challenges identified, the top effectiveness challenges when they're looking at their own platform, the big threats are the increased speed and diversity of domestic and cross-border payments, the lack of cross-border sharing, and the lack of cross-sector sharing between financial services, social media, and telecommunications. But we're going to hear from our panelists now who are at the forefront of resolving some of these challenges. So I think I'll bring Molly back on and the full panel to join.
Thanks. I have to say, the silent disco thing is wild. What you might not realize sitting there is that we, the speakers on the stage, do have full access auditorially to the other speaker on the other side of the room. So it's really a fabulous exercise in, kind of split brain work. So we are actually going to invite our illustrious panelists to the stage. Come on up. We're going to do a little bit of reshuffling of things because there are 8 of them, which I understand is a crazy number of people to agree to have on a panel. And so my excuse to you in saying yes to all of them is that it provides such a strong illustration of one of my big personal points in running this session, which is to illustrate just how much information sharing is already being facilitated and how incredibly diverse a set of services it is. And I might encourage you, while we get ourselves settled, maybe get up, stretch. It's after lunch. Take a moment. We've got silent disco going on. Yeah. It's so exciting to have all of you here, shoulder to shoulder. I am going to ask each of you in turn to introduce yourselves with answers to a few simple questions. So you know how sometimes in a boardroom you'll be asked to go around and give your name and affiliation and, what animal would you be if you could be any animal? So our version of that today is I'm going to ask you, please share, of course, your name, the platform that you represent, what data or signals or intelligence, and in fact, now you can use some of that language to help us understand what is being shared on your platform, and importantly, to what purpose. And then, as your fun question, answer, what is one myth about information sharing that you are excited to bust today? And my hope is that as we go through what will be a long line of introductions, that question will start to lead to a little bit of dialogue in between you, as well as just helping folks to understand who all of you are and what you're doing. Go ahead, Brian, if you want to start.
Thank you very much. Is this too loud? Is this too soft? I don't want to break eardrums here, and I just can't tell. Okay. My name is Brian Cute. I'm now the interim CEO of Global Cyber Alliance. We are a not-for-profit that focuses on making the internet more secure, both from the infrastructure side and for end users in terms of getting them the tools that they need to protect themselves. I'm here today to talk about one of the programs that we facilitate, which is called Domain Trust. And Domain Trust, and it's really a domain trust community, and that's the point I want to really emphasize here. It's a group that we bring together and facilitate conversation around known or suspected to be malicious domain names. And that's what the information we share among the members. It is one universe of the many, many universes of data that the Global Signal Exchange and Emily try to take into account, but that's the universe. And so what we do in that regard is we have domain name registrars, registries, some cybersecurity experts, and other firms to come together on a quarterly basis and to share data about known or suspected to be malicious domain names with each other. The big goal at the end of this is to work as a community to move an entire industry, the domain name industry, toward a place where they're able to more systematically remove known malicious domain names from the system. That's the big goal. But we do it in a community context because we have a lot of experience going back to the beginning of the internet. Emily and I, again, having worked together at ICANN. These things take time, they take persistence, and they take communities. And action really comes from communities in our mind. Data is an enabler. So the myth part is people say data drives action. No. Organizations who commit to change drive actions. Organizations who commit to change drive action. Data enables them to fulfill their commitments. That's how we view it. And so in a group where you're with a number of trusted, right now we have 40 regulars, we have 60 exchanging information, contributing or taking data. But in a room where you know you have trusted partners, you can share data in your own name, not anonymously. You can assess it as you see fit in terms of confidence level, and then each in turn can begin to augment that, is the kind of community dynamic we want to facilitate. That also can spur, and we've seen it, those really important one-to-one connections. So invariably, two of them in that room are going to get together on the side, they're going to start talking, and they're going to create something that's impactful and helpful, and we've seen that happen. So it's both a community dynamic and the one-to-one information sharing in an envelope of trust, which is critical.
Thanks, Brian. Brady.
And that was fantastic. Yeah. Why, I got to follow that. Hello, all. My name is Brady Finta. I'm the CEO of the National Elder Fraud Coordination Center. How that came about and what we do, I spent...
Okay, I'm going to ask you to really stick to the prompt. What type of content do you host, and to what end?
The type of content we host is, we call them selectors. I've heard like 4 different words for it already. Essentially anything that relates to bad guys. So any of your fraud indicators that would lead you back to an actual, criminal conspirator or somewhere in the fraud cycle, that's what we ask for, that's what we hold, that's what we analyze, and that's what we push out to our members. We did come about because of, I spent 23 years in the FBI, some of it drinking from the elder fraud fire hose at the end of the spectrum, which is the victim side of the house, and feeling somewhat limited in what our abilities were to accomplish our mission. Disrupt elder fraud, reduce it in America, and put bad guys in jail. Our whole mission now, as the National Elder Fraud Coordination Center, is to coordinate the efforts that already exist in the private sector in order to assist law enforcement in that mission. So when our partners, some of which are made up of people on these stages, have that data, and they have the analytical capability to pass selectors and data sets to us, we can aggregate it, generally cross-sector, and provide it to law enforcement. And conversely, when law enforcement has those selectors, but essentially doesn't know where to look for additional data on them, we can give them insight into that. It's probably time for the myth now. When I talk to different companies all day, every day, some in the same sectors and some in different sectors, and I hear from different companies, man, I wish we could, but we just can't. Mostly because I'm not saying lawyers are ruining the world, but
But you're not saying
I'm
that.
not saying that. No, it's different interpretations, right? And I'm here to say that I think collectively we can bust that myth, maybe even just enough for everybody to share something. And for us, that would probably be enough.
Awesome, thank you. I'll try to keep it brief, otherwise I'll get harassed by Molly. My name is Chris Wong. I'm with TRM Labs. We're a blockchain analytics firm. Law enforcement uses our tools to trace illicit assets. Private sector uses our tools to identify risk that exists. But specifically, I run our Beacon network. So Beacon network is a purpose-built public-private disruption network. We are designed to reduce latency across the board, in which public sector will flag addresses that have illicit assets in them. We will automatically propagate that risk forward, and then we will alert specific platforms when those assets land on those platforms. So we rolled out in April, and to date we've interdicted nearly $50 million worth of assets. And so really the goal here is to kind of build products or build networks that move at speed and then are designed for a purpose, and that purpose is interdicting illicit assets. So those alerts come with an ask, and that ask is stop these funds. What would my myth be is that you need a monolithic solution to a problem. What you need to identify are nodes of disruption. Where can you have the highest point of impact? And you build coalitions of the willing to really press on those points.
Good afternoon. My name is Mark Thomas. I'm a product lead at Meta, supporting the company's proactive voluntary signal sharing. We support a number of signal sharing collaborations across child safety, drugs, and most recently frauds and scams. The platform that we use is Threat Exchange, and the program for fraud and scams is called FIRE, Fraud Intelligence Reciprocal Exchange. As part of FIRE, we exchange threat indicators associated with bad actors and scammy content. We ingest those threat indicators from partners, use that information to take down bad actors on our platforms, conduct additional investigations, and return some of those threat indicators back to our partners so that they can do the same on their platforms. We also, as part of our signal sharing efforts, share intelligence, tactics, techniques, and procedures, and other best practices. I think one of the biggest myths that I've seen around signal sharing is that it is straightforward and easy. Impactful signal sharing takes time, it takes effort, it takes the right people at the table, it takes a concerted effort by leadership from across organizations to make things happen, particularly along the lines of what Brady was saying. So it is something that is quite involved.
Thank you. Thank you. Emily Taylor. I'm a co-founder of the Global Signal Exchange, and I'm the CEO of Oxford Information Labs. So the Global Signal Exchange is a non-profit, and it was opened in January this year. And what signals are we sharing? Just keeping to the rules. We're signal agnostic, which means that we do share intelligence about domains, IP addresses, URLs, but also other stuff, so such as IBANs, merchant IDs, phone numbers, and that actually the power is in the mix of those signals, because if you think back to Nick's excellent presentation just now, really the Global Signal Exchange is aiming to fill the gaps that he identified. It is inherently international in nature. It is inherently cross-sector in nature. So all of those sectors that a scam will travel across in its lifetime, plus the public sector, the law enforcement, the people who can in fact arrest people at the end of the day. Also, being a neutral platform, and that sort of the ability to act as a clearinghouse for participants who then take their own decisions about whether or not they act on that information, means that we're in a great position to provide analysis, look at trends. We've just published a set of league tables where you can look at sectors such as the domain sector, which organizations are really successful at managing down their risk, which need more help, and it's really quite quite striking that there do seem to be some very strong narratives coming out of that. So the myth, I mean, the guys came out with some of my myths already, but I suppose let me just give a shout out to the myth that privacy laws, and particularly European privacy laws, somehow make information sharing illegal. They don't. I completely agree with you, Mark, that it doesn't make it easy, but it shouldn't be easy. It should be something that you do in a thoughtful way and manage and create safeguards to protect people that the data leads to. But ultimately, you have a really strong public interest in fighting scams and fraud. And that, when you weigh the balance between the rights of the individuals who might be impacted by your activities versus fulfilling the public interest of pursuing criminals and fighting scams and fraud, that balancing test, yes, it has to be done, but it certainly does not make data sharing illegal. So that's my myth.
Thank you. I'm Josh Bercu. I'm Senior VP at USTelecom, the Broadband Association, which is a trade association based here in Washington, D.C. That represents the communications industry. And I'm also the executive director of the industry Traceback group, which was stood up by USTelecom and is the platform I am representing today. And what we do with the ITG, I wrote down your really excellent list of what is sharing. We report, we exchange, we analyze, we evaluate, we alert, and we assemble. And specifically the data we do that on is we trace illegal calls back to their source. Really started as an effort to trace illegal robocalls over 10 years ago now. It has morphed to do every type of illegal call, whether that's a scam call, whether that's harassing call, spoofed, not spoofed. And we trace them. They sometimes hit 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 U.S., non-U.S. providers along the way, and we get back to the source. And it is all of those because what we're doing is not only tracing it, getting that investigative data, we're telling the carriers that there's bad calls on their network. They have now capabilities to look at that. We're telling, at the end of the chain that they might have a bad customer or vulnerability. We've seen platforms that get hacked and then generate scam calls. So, that gives someone awareness of that so they can go look for that vulnerability and patch it. And we also effectively serve as for the industry as the clearinghouse with law enforcement. So speaking of the legal issues, before we built this, it would take a regulator, law enforcement, 3 to 5 months, I believe, is the number they use, 2 to 3 months to get the data we get in hours, basically, and because they'd have to do a subpoena on each entity on the along the chain. We have all that data much faster at a much larger scale, where we're doing, we've done over 30,000 tracebacks, which is representative of millions of illegal calls, so billions even. On the myth side, I struggled a lot with this, and I wrote a lot of notes. And I kept changing my mind. I didn't want to be negative, but I do want to pick up the it's not as easy, as especially when folks look at different industries, that they come. I've noticed with a lot of assumptions of, that's straightforward. You just give us this. The telephone number is a good one. That'll solve it. It isn't so simple. And an anecdote I have. Our data, I've argued with a state AG office who claimed our data were just like a red light camera, so we're just illegality, so all our data should be out there publicly. And I've had to argue against this idea, which is, first of all, the biggest beneficiary of that would be all the scam shell companies that we fight with every day that try to hide, give them a great roadmap, might also give the plaintiff bar some things to go after, not the scammers, but the deep pockets that exist. So that doesn't necessarily go after the scammers. But also, we have data of the whole relationships in the communications industry. That's all proprietary. Who is every business relationship? That's a lot of data. And the most interesting thing is I get a lot of carriers that come to us and say, hey, we need your data to know who to work with, who to take traffic from. And we're working on a lot of projects. My colleague Jessica, who's here today, has been leading a lot of that effort. We're working on ways to do that responsibly and thoughtfully, that don't create anti-competitive concerns, don't create real harms, don't create risk for us, frankly, if we inadvertently put companies out of business. And the funny thing about this, and I'll wrap up on my anecdote, is some of the loudest carriers that say, we need your data, when I said finally, hey, we're there, we're going to be building out this, and they go, wait a second, someone can see data about us like that? Hold on a second. So again, that's where some of the complexities come in.
My name is Jennifer Quaid, and I have the privilege of running the Canadian Cyber Threat Exchange and now the Canadian Anti-Scam Coalition. So, what data do we share? The Canadian Cyber Threat Exchange has been around for 10 years next week, and we were built by the private sector for the private sector. So I want to be very clear. We are a private sector, not-for-profit, not funded by the government. And we share cyber information of all types, signals, indicators, threat profiles. The goal of what we do is to build resilience in the community through knowledge. Great goal. And we're going to do the same with the Canadian Anti-Scam Coalition. The myth? If you build it, they will come. It only works in the movies. We built the CCTX 10 years ago, and effective sharing really only started about 2.5 years ago, despite everything we did. And the big companies would say, but we're not seeing the value. There's no data there. And of course, me being me would go, did you put any there? I tend to call people out. So when we built increased opportunity for live interaction through things like signal channels, there was increased opportunity for sharing. There was increased trust. It took time. Now we're seeing the sharing.
Okay, I get to go last. I am Jason Cooper. I am the Chief Data Sharing Officer, so I don't need to say anything else besides that. It's in my title of the Cyber Threat Alliance, the CTA. We are a nonprofit trade association, a 501c6 here in the United States. We have a global membership of cybersecurity companies with a lot of different variety within them, from large ones to smaller ones. It's about 3 dozen right now. All names most people here will be familiar with as sort of significant players within the cybersecurity industry. So what do we do? We do a number of things. We have sort of policy and advocacy work that we do. We help our members with marketing and communications, and we host a number of webinars and publish joint analytic reports. We contribute towards other industry efforts along the same lines, like with Aspen Institute or World Economic Forum. But my role really is to focus on the threat intelligence or threat data exchange amongst our members. So we actually have an in-house platform that we host that allows our members to share threat intelligence. They actually have a minimum number they have to share in order to stay, in good standing as a member. And it also allows all of them to consume everything that everyone else is sharing. So, at its root, this was founded by some of the big cybersecurity companies: Palo Alto Networks, Fortinet, Symantec, McAfee, with the idea that you're stronger together, and that's sort of the underlying premise, right? Now, there's lots of little nuances to this. I'm somebody who came from a big tech background, 26 years working at big companies like Microsoft and Salesforce, and I've been doing this now for about 8 months. And really, they brought me in to sort of figure out how to kind of next level our platform. And I can tell you, it's interesting, and this is leading towards my myth, right? We have tons and tons of data, hundreds of millions of indicators. But I think my myth is that having tons and tons of data in itself it's not effective, right? So a lot of data does not equal effectiveness, and what does equal effectiveness to me would be being able to move at the same scale and speed as the actors we're trying to stop, the gangs, the global persistent threats, and really I think about like how we talk about things like infrastructure cycles, how quickly they can pop up their infrastructure, and then we're always chasing. And to me, it's all going to come down to, in my opinion, being able to kind of invest even more in technology to fight this, to keep us current, to keep things moving at speed. Before we got up here, Chris asked me, is it simple enough to say that you get a domain? How fast can you actually get it taken down? Well, then, there's no straight answer to that, right? It could be fast. It could take a while. It kind of depends on how it's consumed. But one thing I definitely would say is the myth I've seen is that our members actually contribute more than they consume. And I think there's a lot of reasons why they don't actually consume as much as they could, and or why we haven't, brought in additional sources of data. We're a shared threat intelligence system, but we're also kind of closed because it's just for our members. We're branching out on that. We're looking at new opportunities. We are a member of the Global Signal Exchange. Happy to be partnering with Emily and her team on that. I think that pretty much answers the questions.
That's great. Thank you, all of you. So I hope as you are listening to these intros and start to have a sense of the domains in which each of these folks work, you are starting to think about questions that you have for them. These are the folks who are trying to solve the problem that we are all thinking about. We will have a large chunk of time for Q&A. I am happy to keep asking them hard questions, but would love for you guys to start thinking about questions you might have to add in. My next question for all of you, and we'll do this popcorn style, so whoever is excited to start. What is one specific choice you made, design feature you implemented, program element that you crafted that has been extremely significant in your ability to succeed at your mission? And I'm a person who always hates being asked a favorite, so it doesn't have to be the most important, but just one really significant design element. And as you tell us about it, feel free to throw in what's a success story that illustrates how that has helped you be successful, or what is a specific challenge that was really a sticking point that particular choice allowed you to overcome. Go ahead, Jennifer.
I'm going to jump on this one. So, and I referenced it, the signal channel.
So tell us a little bit more. What is the signal channel?
Signal channel is just a secure-ish, because nothing's actually secure, messaging system. Theory.
Yeah.
Theory is it's encrypted. We started a signal channel, and when we started it, I had quite a few naysayers in the membership. They were saying, nope, we'll never use it, we'll never use it. That thing blows up. And it blows up live, and it blows up real time. And it is an incredible way for members to pass information to each other. But the success story, it is what just makes me so incredibly impressed with how the members are actually participating and working together. And that is when you see somebody posts something that they have seen on their system, not sure what it is, maybe don't have quite the depth of resources as some of the larger companies, and a large company jumps on it and goes down the rabbit hole, because they are still very technical people and they like rabbit holes, and comes back with, you have just discovered a vulnerability that nobody knew about. We need to give it a number and a name and register it. And as a community, 5 of these people went off in a separate chat and unpacked the vulnerability, blew it up in various areas, and were able to stop it from having the impact it might have. Just because somebody said, anyone seen this? That's all it takes. That, to me, is collaboration in action.
I'm going to cheat and do 2 quick ones. One is that we take a very nimble approach to our operation. We do agile software development for our portal, but we take the same approach because the threat is that dynamic. And if we had just stuck with what we first built and did it, we'd be just focused on illegal robocalls. We wouldn't be working with financial institutions, others on scams. We wouldn't be expanding the way we have. We're always trying to do it. to expand our effort and expand the impact. So that's one. I think that was a really important lesson we've and has been successful. The other is we also are industry-created, industry-led, but then we had enough success that Congress actually codified our role. It's still industry-funded and led, but there's this congressional and regulatory overlay. And what I would say with that is that what I've seen with our work is that our work powers enforcement, and then enforcement powers our work. So a lot of we disrupt illegal call campaigns before there's ever enforcement, because the threat of enforcement keeps some of the enablers on their toes and incentivizes them to take corrective action before they get a letter from an enforcement agency.
Thanks. So the design choice that I would pick, there's many, and like you, Josh, we have a very agile development team, so we're really able to jump on new challenges, and that's very exciting. But the one I'd pick is that we decided to place the control into the hands of data sharers, so they could choose whether or not to share at all, whether to share openly on the marketplace amongst other accredited users, or whether to go into small groups. And we actually see it as like a journey of trust. So people will join going, what is this? Is it going to do anything for me? And usually their first stop is sharing with one other counterpart in a small group. And then they're like, oh, wow, this was amazing. And we'll either expand the membership of the group or go into open data sharing. So Visa this week has just chosen to share data openly on our platform. But a success story that I would highlight is in very early experiments of that small group sharing between Google and Meta, for example, or Meta and Microsoft. They've all come out with the same feedback, which is, wow, we got signals that were nearly 100% useful and actionable to us, and nearly 100% new to us. And these are platforms, so Google, a co-founder, Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, which has just joined. They see a lot, but see a lot on their own territory. So it's joining up those islands of knowledge and enabling the platforms to sort of be proactive and like, oh, well, if we may not have seen this harm yet where we are, but others have, and we can then be proactive about mitigating threats that we didn't know about. So that was a real success story for us, early days yet.
Great, thanks. So actually it's Jason, and then Brian, and then we're going to go to Mark, and then Chris.
Okay, yeah, so for me, really quickly, fully agree with the agile approach. I was a product manager in a previous life, and that's the only way to get things done in an organized way that makes sense to me. So, but it's also important just about building your priorities, having a roadmap, and making sure you know where all of this goes, and then being agile enough to change speeds or change gears if you need to. So we're doing that. But I would say, at CTA, we have a program for our members that we call it early shares. A lot of we like to say that our members don't compete on data, they compete on the research and on the technology, right? So the data part we should be sharing. But these are organizations that often compete with each other. What the early share does is, they'll have a piece of finished intelligence, and they share it with the CTA community, several days in advance before going live with it. And it allows the CTA community members, other companies, their competitors, to chime in with what they may have seen that aligns with that research, to occasionally contradict some of the conclusions in the research. And it really made the whole thing more valuable to everyone, because they're getting a heads up on it. Their PR team gets a head up on it. They're prepared for their customer inquiries about these topics. Again, finished intelligence, new stuff, new investigations that they've been working on. And that's really been successful. And we're looking at ways to expand it and actually make it more inclusive with our overall corpus of data. So a good one.
Great. Okay, I think Brian.
Thank you. So for us, I'll come back to the community aspect of it. So structuring it as a community is, we think, key, because, the object is sharing of information and data about domain names. That is definitely the object. But we also use it as a pretext to have conversations or start conversations about taking action. among that group. And that's why community is useful. Within that, we've seen short term, obviously, the opportunity to sinkhole a domain or take down a domain is the type of action we're looking for, and that's important. But longer term, what we're looking for is to build toward agreements across an industry, agreements across groups of actors on the types of actions to take and how to take them. 2 examples. In another bit of work we do, I don't know if you've heard of manners or the mutually agreed norms for routing security. We facilitate that group. It's network operators around the world. Routing on the internet has some flaws, and traffic can be rerouted and really bad things can happen. But in that group, which has been around for about 10 years, we get together in a trusted circle, and what they've developed as a group is norms that they can apply to their own network operations that mitigate the risk of routing insecurity and diversion of traffic. And that's the long-term agreement that we're trying to start here with this small group. One other example, which is a great outcome, is 2 of the participants went off in a corner. One of them had really great capabilities, predictive capabilities about what domains might be used for cybercrime or fraud or scams. And the other organization, which provides a kind of preventative service for end users, they worked together, they gained trust, they saw what each other could do, and now the organization that offers preventative services actually relies on their predictive technology. And what does that mean? It means when a domain name becomes a known malicious domain, that organization can take action quicker. They don't have to wait for other independent corroborating pieces of data to take action. They can add a name to their feed quicker. And when you think about the amount of damage a malicious domain can do over the course of a day, Josh, you're referring to that, or 2 days, that matters. That's a big outcome.
Yep. Thank you for that product manager comment. I think when we entered...
Make sure to hold the mic close to your face.
Can you hear? Okay. I think when we entered the fraud and scam space, we realized that there was already a pre-existing ecosystem here. So it wasn't about reinventing the wheel as much as it was about coming to reinforce it, strengthen it, and see what we can do to empower it even more so. So when we were looking at expanding signal sharing as part of FIRE, we looked at organizations, industry consortia, major players in the landscape that we could partner with, work with, and start to leverage those relationships to scale across different industries. Our example with the Global Signals Exchange, our work with NEFC, the partnership that we have with the FSI-SAC, with CIFAS, with Stop Scams UK. These are all examples of us working closely with some of these players in the market, empowering them to be able to develop their own signal sharing capabilities and then working with them to empower them even further. As a result of that, through our FSI-SAC collaboration, we have over 50 banks working with us. We're working closely with the Australian Financial Crime Exchange with about half a dozen different banks. And so it's been a real success story and something that we're looking to replicate even further as we enter different industries.
So 2 things that we built into Beacon was speed and purpose. So speed. Before I came to TRM, I was at the FBI for 10 years, working a lot of crypto investigations. Mostly what I worked on was North Korean hacks, DPRK IT workers, that sort of thing. And so very good at laundering assets. If there's anything we know about crypto assets is that they move and they move quickly. One thing that is not reasonable to expect law enforcement to be able to do is be plugged into their laptop 24/7 tracing assets and then waiting for them to go to an exchange and then pulling out the Rolodex and trying to figure out who those contacts are and then asking them to email them and put a hold on an account. And so what we built was something that could move at the speed of crypto, follow those assets after that risk had been applied by law enforcement, and then purpose. So when somebody wants to join Beacon, and it's free to join for exchanges, we have currently about 75% of centralized exchange volume within the network. But there's purpose behind it because there's an ask. You can't just join Beacon and receive the signals and not do anything. So when an exchange joins, they're committing...
Wait, say that again, Chris. Slower, louder.
Louder. You can't just join Beacon to receive the signal. You have to commit to acting on the signal. And so the commitment to acting on the signal is when you get that beacon alert, then you have to put a hold on those assets. You're committing yourself to putting a hold on those assets. You're committing yourself to doing your best to put a hold on those assets, but understanding that exchanges feel the risk of doing that. We also tell law enforcement, you need to be communicating with that exchange within 24 hours. And so there's commitment on both sides of the field. And really, in order to get consumption that we talked about previously, it's like you're not going to join the network unless you are consuming, unless you're receiving those signals, unless you're acting on those signals.
Brady, you're
Thanks.
wrapping us up.
I love the requirement to act. I think I'm going to do that. Yeah.
This is really, by the way, the reason why I wanted to put all of you on stage was just so you could hear each other talk about all the things that you're doing, because collaboration among peers is one of the best ways to push innovation forward in an ecosystem like this. So love that.
No doubt. And that kind of does play right into the one thing maybe that I've done so far that has really worked is to start off with the assumption that everybody knows their data better than we will, and to be specifically non-specific in what we ask for. So when we prepare our request for information or a referral, we basically provide what we have, the context of what we have, and leave it open to those members to say, this is what we find applicable from our data sets, from our world, and give us what they think is important. And to tell you the truth, the people that run those programs and the analysts that produce those products, we could never do that. So using the existing expertise that's already out there, but layering it in a way that it makes sense it feels like magic. I think one of the great examples of that for us so far, and we've only been doing this since April, is we got a referral from FBI. Hey, we have a whole bunch of cryptocurrency, selectors that are out there that, we want to know if you or any of your members know about any of these things. And as we were deciding essentially who to include in that RFI, I told the analyst, let's include our retailers also. Got a little pushback, like our retailers don't know, they don't hold information on cryptocurrency wallets. But we did it anyway, and one of our retailers came back and said, hey, one of the selectors that was related to one of those wallets actually had an address and a name associated with it. We have a person we're already looking at for gift card fraud. And by the way, we have pictures of them exchanging gift cards. Would you like those photos? I think the FBI guys were like frothing at the mouth. So I think one of our kind of company mantras, I'm not sure if this is a good thing or not, but is we don't know what we don't know. And we use that on a daily basis.
Thank you all. I think it's time for us to close out the patting ourselves on the back stage of the conversation and start getting into some of the hard stuff. As much as I could spend another hour asking you to tell more about all of your successes, because there are many, and you should all talk to these folks about some of the amazing work that they've achieved. But let's talk about, okay, what's not happening and what needs to happen. So before I pose this question to you, I also want to ask in the audience, there is a microphone that is set up over there right by the curtain. If you have a question for these speakers, if you could start working your way over in that direction, and we have a staff member who's also available. So if you want to flag him down, let him know that you have a question. That's going to be what we turn to right after this. But before we do that, I'm going to ask you guys to, again, whoever is interested to start, and we might, if we have some audience questions, we might start pulling those in to the mix. But where do you think this wide array of information sharing providers should be able to get? And what are the things we most need to do in order to get there? Who would like to start? Yeah, go for it.
So if I just look at the lay of the land, I see three report from 22, we're at $2.5 billion in loss from crypto investment scams. Next year is $4 billion. This year is $6 billion. The trend line is not good. It's not getting better. And as I look at it, you have people who are doing great work. So if anybody's heard of Level Up with the FBI, they are proactively identifying victims and then trying to disrupt the cycle before they know they're victims. But to be brutally honest, that's something that they're not they don't have the staffing to do. There's 12,000-ish FBI agents that are out there, and last year there was 40,000 complaints, and we're looking at probably a 15 to 20% report rate. And so just if you look at those numbers alone, that is not something that's possible to handle.
Not only is it whatever that report rate is, but even of the thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of signals that IC3 gets, they're only able to do something about a small fraction of those.
Exactly. And then if we look at it on the financial side of the house, you'll have your exchanges, you'll have your banks, they're running their heuristics to proactively try and identify victims that might go at a 30-day drop, and then they have 30 days to respond to that with potentially writing a SAR or putting a restriction in place of some type. And generally speaking, if you look at the on-chain data, what you see is that at 60 days, somebody is scammed. It's done. And so really the question becomes, how do you get to, I talked about the $50 million number at the beginning. That's a drop in the bucket, really, when it comes to scams. DOJ, FBI, Secret Service, they did a great job doing $15 billion. But again, it's a drop in the bucket when it comes to the overall effort. And so when I look at the problem is we need fewer victims. We need fewer victims sending less money. So we need to identify victims faster, sooner, when they don't know they're victims. And so right now there's a 60-day lag on that. And so how do we shrink the point in which we get an actionable signal to then have action? And so one of the interesting things, it was not designed this way. Beacon is designed to trace funds forward and identify cash out points to stop those. But I'll just ask the question, how many people here are familiar with inducement payments? Anybody?
Say that phrase again.
Inducement payments. So basically, when somebody is being scammed, oftentimes they'll try and withdraw money. And so the scammer will actually allow them to withdraw a certain, maybe 10% of the funds back. And just give them more confidence in the scam, and so they send more money. It's a long-term game. What we ended up seeing is that Beacon alerted the exchanges on the inducement payments and basically was able to identify victims for the exchange before the victim's 60-day or before the exchange's 60-day cycle would run. So proactively identifying victims that way. What we need to do is identify them after the first payment, because it's probably a lot easier to pull somebody out of the cycle after sending $500 versus $250,000. So I'll just pause
This
there.
makes me think about our victim story from earlier this morning. 6 months of interaction. How many potential intervention points might there have been before it got quite so bad?
I don't want to steal yours. Just to piggyback off that, and Chris, you probably know from your FBI days better than me, Brady as well, but I do want to sort of put out there too, there's also not there's disproportionate amount of the scams that are being done by smallish groups, right? We're not talking, I'm sure there's a very long tail, but when we're talking about the number of whether it's 50 billion, 100 almost, I think the FTC number was, conservative estimate was 30 or 40 billion. The less conservative estimate that came out this week was 198 billion, I think. Whatever it is in between there.
Increase of about 23, 24% since their last number.
Right. Like a lot of that's driven by not that many, a big infrastructure, but a finite number of groups. And I think we've got to keep that in mind too. We've seen that in our space. Raids on call centers in India about a decade ago led to an overnight 80+% drop in impersonating the government. Like it was one group that was disproportionately responsible for those calls. So I think that's some sign of optimism. The strike force that's been announced, I think that stuff is really exciting. The work Brady's doing, I think is really exciting because there are ways that there can be massive impacts with targeted enforcement.
I'm generally a positive person also, which is remarkable after being in law enforcement as long as I was. I totally agree that we can do this. And I think it was said at the opening that there's a real positive feel, and I get to see it every single day when I get to see the individual efforts of a lot of the companies and law enforcement agencies that are out there. What we're not doing well, I think, is stacking up those efforts on a consistent basis to cause long-term impact. So while we can look at each one of them and, like, I used to say, hey, we did a great case. A great case doesn't necessarily mean you impacted the threat. It just means you did a great case. We need to do enough great cases to make a difference, to make it go 24% the other way. Now, I've already seen it at NFC that I think when we just decide to, when companies decide to actually work together, their individual efforts actually are good enough. The data analytics is good enough. It's all good enough to find those bad guys, those victims, and to intercede. And I do realize on the enforcement side of the house, I would much rather have, less victims than put more bad guys in jail. But when we're doing that, the enforcement game, in order to do it consistently over time, there has to be structured, consistent sharing by the same people. And when you talk about task force operations, we all realize guys that have been on either drug or gang task forces, when you have 7 different police departments and federal agencies in the same room, everybody's got a guy. Like, I got a guy that does that. I got a guy that sells guns or whatever it is. And so your scope, your capabilities are gigantic. And when I talk to individual investigators, particularly from banks, and I say, hey, at your bank, imagine you were sitting in your cubicle farm with the guy from Meta and the guy from Microsoft and somebody from Verizon, and everybody could pitch in on the same case. And everybody's like, well, yeah, but that's never going to, it's going to happen. We're going to do that. And collectively, I think this is too big for the government, but it's not too big for America. We could do this.
Snaps to that. Thanks, Brady, for giving us a little bit of a hopeful message. A lot of other people have things they want to say. Before we do that, I'm just curious, of all of you in the audience right now, how many are actively engaging in an information sharing platform or agreement of some kind? Okay, great. I would love to hear from you because we have only about 15 minutes left, and we'll pull in, I think, as we get there. What challenges are you having to overcome in order to engage in information sharing? What asks do you have of your information sharing platform providers that would make your life easier? And what needs do you find that you're looking to be filled from your participation in information sharing that you're not getting right now? Anyone in the audience have thoughts on that? Great.
Testing.
Yeah.
Good. Hey, my name is Steven. I work at Capital One. We're a bank, and I work in our credit card scam prevention team. And so we've started to begin consuming and sharing some of our data. We began experimenting with the Global Signal Exchange, which we're excited to learn more about. A comment was made earlier that a lot of data does not necessarily mean a high level of effectiveness. And I would say similarly, a lot of data sharing initiatives do not equal a high level of effectiveness. And so I think all the organizations up here sound awesome. I think it can be a little overwhelming to kind of navigate the large set of options that we have and determine where we should or should not invest our time and resources. So my question is, how should we navigate that to kind of narrow down our focus to maximize the effectiveness of our data sharing initiatives?
You get a gold star. If no other question got asked, I wanted someone from the audience to ask that question. Who has thoughts?
So at least our theory. So we've started working. So we're an industry vertical. We've started working with individual financial institutions, individual other groups, and at least our theory of the case is that that's basically a proof of concept that's going to grow, and at some point it's going to reach a tipping point, and everyone's going to agree, let's do this vertical to vertical. And so I think that's kind of my theory of the case, is that there can be some organic development and growth by, hey, this is working, but now we need to scale it further, and it's already been proven and everyone's bought in on it works. And so you start with some of the bigger entities with more resources that lean in, and then you eventually scale that so that can get the long tail across the whole sector.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that question. And just the number of people on this panel and the number of amazing organizations. And I'm already looking out into the audience. I can see colleagues from CIFAS who we work with, Netcraft, a lot of vendors. There is a huge amount of activity in this area. And one of the things that's really been occurring to me as listening to these colleagues is, that and it's something we're trying to do with the Global Signal Exchanges. Don't try and do everything. Try and be interoperable and enable people who know best. The people working deeply in those industry sectors and verticals. The CIFAS in the UK, the telco, organisations here. People like Brian's organisation, the Global Cyber Alliance, and so on. There's so much knowledge in these different pockets. But joining up those islands of information and knowledge is incredibly important to be able to respond to scams and fraud in close to real time. Does require a lot of technical grunt. It needs an awful lot of expertise and infrastructure to do it. So, we're receiving 1 to 2 million signals a day. There's others on this panel who are dealing with hundreds of millions of signals, as are we. Is not the stamp collector in us that wants to have more than everything else. It has to be doing something for the members. And so I really encourage you, as others have said, to do the proof of concept. We've got a financial pilot. We're delighted to have you guys involved in that and others as well. And to find the value, to find the proof of value that you can then communicate internally. And we are convinced that it is cross-sector, in close to real time, at scale, at speed. And there are different appetites. We've heard this, and there is different pockets of expertise that will work for others. We are not trying to all fight each other to the death. We are trying to defeat scams and fraud and complete the criminal justice arc, which is completely missing from our societies at the moment, and there are people really suffering as a result. So if we can join together and as we're doing as non-profits and collaborate, that it's hard to collaborate, otherwise everybody would be doing it. But if we can overcome those differences and collaborate, I think it will make a big difference.
So, picking up on what Emily has said, I'm going to ask everyone to go back 5 years when the world was shut down with a god-awful pandemic. How quickly did we find a solution for that when the world decided it needed it and we all worked together? That is the level of effort, that's the level of commitment that we need now, and we need to mobilize our industries, our associations, all of our collaborative efforts, and our governments to make that same decision again.
Thank you, Jennifer. I was going to steal that line that you shared with me earlier. It focuses the mind, doesn't it? The pandemic. So let me dampen some of the optimism that we just heard. Okay, I was in a security briefing in Singapore about a month and a half ago. Regional law enforcement, Interpol, and a lot of focus on the scam centers. We all know about the scam centers. We know the incredible increase in phishing attacks and scam attacks that they've generated through their operations in the last few years. 54% click-through rates with deepfake technology of today. What was said in one of those rooms was, in 2 years' time, we expect them to have fully agentic systems operating 24/7, 7 days a week, 365. Let that sink in. More effective deepfake. A wave, a tsunami. There's 400 million small businesses on the planet. There's about 10 million NGOs. How many billions of internet users? That's what's going to wash over all of us in 2 to 3 years' time. We don't have time We have to treat this like a pandemic. Everything we're doing collectively, all of the good intention here to work collectively, and it is there, we need to accelerate that. And even if we did, we're still 2 to 3 years behind what's coming.
So just to add to that, and the thing that Brian just said, that's the way I'm thinking about it, right? Is this is going to get so much more enabled by the technology growth that's happening, by the technology curve we're seeing, how it's going to accelerate. We're at the infancy stages of the agentic AI stuff. From my perspective, there's really two things. One, we don't measure this in any kind of consistent way. There's all sorts of measurements. I've heard this billion, that, CTA, my organization, did a paper with Cyber Green and the Zurich Insurance Group, where we estimated a nearly $1 trillion gap between what's insured and what's not. There's all these different measurements like this. I think we really need. I'm going to promote my organization a little bit here, but we're working on sort of standards for how we measure this. At the end of the day, it's, are there less victims? Are they losing less money? Are we able to disrupt the infrastructure quicker? Are we able to make it more expensive for the people committing the scams and the crimes? And measuring that at least in this country, a national scale, I think would be useful, because we can kind of see, is it making progress? And then the second thing is really investing more and more in the technology to keep up with the technology investments being made by the criminals. From my perspective, I'm running I mentioned we have tons and tons of data, but making use of it in the way I would like to is costly. And we have a nonprofit with a shoestring budget. Anyone here from AWS, if you'd like to talk to me about how you might enable me to help, because we're on your platform, enable me to kind of make more progress on this at a discounted rate or something like that, as opposed to chasing down bugs, I'd love to talk about that, because I think that we want to make those investments. I need AI training cycles. I need, more infrastructure, more compute. And I think that probably a lot of the others in the nonprofit world feel the same way, that we're fighting a battle with limited resources and tools against adversaries who are well funded. Some of them are nation state funded, right? Some of them are funded by international, organized crime groups. And for me, it's interesting because I had most of my career in big tech. I worked at Microsoft for 20 years. There's no resources weren't really an issue. Now I'm on the other side of it, but I actually see we're doing more with less than I probably felt like I was doing at a big tech company, where you spend a lot of time on politics, arguing, PR and marketing, things that are, when you're in the nonprofit world, we're mission aligned. And I think that's kind of where I see this, is we got to have standardized measurements, and we need to really invest in the technology and in a unified way. I mean, everyone here hit on the need for the sharers to share with each other as well, right? This is why for CTA, the partnership with Global Signal Exchange is really important, and we're open to any partnerships if it helps move this forward.
I'll answer real quick, and I'll give you more of a direct answer in the immediacy. I think it'll be highly dependent on the type of data sharing, what type of signals, and who you would like to share with. The good news is everybody up here has a specialization, a regional specialization, a specialization in industry, a specialization in the type of signals. So I will honestly say I don't think you can go wrong with sharing with any one of us or all of us. I think the act of actually sharing and taking that step is the important piece. But I think for us, there's a bigger piece here in developing a coordinated signal sharing network. Having all of these nodes talk to each other and work together effectively so that this question won't have to come up. You can come to a centralized group of people and say, this is what we want to share, and we can have a group response and saying, this is how you can share with us.
I'm just going to give a super quick shout out to Capital One, newest member of NEFC, right on. And I could not agree more. It totally stole my thunder. When Capital One came on board with NEFC, very first day, very first lead, best lead we've got. And they actually said, hey, did we give you what you're looking for? Oh my God. Like, it had every selector across sectors that we could start pursuing that is meaty enough and attractive enough to law enforcement to succeed. All I'm saying is I have a tiny little piece in all of this, but the fact that your company, your bank, has the intestinal fortitude to actually act is the most important thing. The more you act in the more different venues that you act, the better chance we have of getting ahead of this.
Any more comments or questions or requests from the audience? Yeah, we've got one over there.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dami Thompson. I run Diligence Africa. We are... Oh, can you hear me okay? Okay. We're a risk intelligence background check company that is in 24 countries in Africa. My question is to Brady and to honestly anyone on the panel, just around what kind of support are you currently having on the continent around investment scams and romance scams, which is sort of our focus areas, and what are you looking for in a partner?
I got some of that.
I think the question is about, could one of you ask them to quiet down across the...
I could take it. Okay.
No. The question was about investments on the African continent in signal sharing. And I want to acknowledge that obviously the target of today's selection of platforms was a focus on North America. And so you won't necessarily get a representative collection of, I encourage you to definitely find Nick and talk to him about the work that they've done looking at the landscape internationally. But if there is anyone who's doing work on the continent and you want to speak to that, I'm looking at Emily. I don't know if you guys are doing any work there.
But let's have a chat. Love to work with you.
The only thing I would say is with each case we get, the better chance we have of finding those signals, those international networks. We say it all the time. There's 1 million elder victims a year. There's not 1 million bad guys, right? They're in specific places. We have plenty of leads in Africa that we're supplying to law enforcement and to the companies that run networks in other continents. That can only improve over time the more members that we have.
So we're going to be wrapping up, and I just want to call out a few things that we've heard. And I also want to acknowledge that there's so much more that these folks can share with you. Please find them over the course of the next day and a half. Emily is actually running a session if you want to learn more specifically about the Global Signal Exchange and how they have built their platform to be adaptable according to consumer need and desire. That'll be a session tomorrow. But I want to call out a few things that we've heard. One is, right now, the burden on the information contributor feels high because there isn't yet a network of sharing among the sharers. I also want to acknowledge that there is a resource scarcity problem, which is not currently incentivizing the sharers to share with one another, because their concern is that if they let go of some of the territory that they uniquely monopolize, then their existence will not be relevant any longer. So there is a need to speak to where the resources are coming from in this entire ecosystem, to figure out how do we make sure to resource the sharers so that they can effectively specialize and collaborate without feeling the existential crisis of will we continue to exist. And each one of them has evolved really specific functions and platforms and tools in order to address the specific subset of problems they focused on, and we don't want to lose all of that. But we also need to think about how do we resource the function of information sharing within the private companies that have to engage in the sharing. Because even once these folks align, there is still going to be a very active engagement required in order to collaborate with them effectively. One of the things I keep hearing from the providers of information sharing platforms is that they have folks who are paying money to be on their platforms. They've already gone through the months of contract negotiations in order to overcome the legal boundaries to participate, and yet they're still not actually offering data or consuming data. And so I want to make sure we have the resourcing question very much top of mind. How do we make sure that we're giving this not just the, oh, it should exist, but making sure that we're really putting in the effort to make it work well on both sides of that equation. Thank you, everyone, so much. Thank you guys for your time.